Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presentation, Top 5 Reasons to Rethink Your Privacy Posture, brought to you by Skyflow. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Harsh Karmakar. Harsh is an architect and technical sales leader whose work has spanned multiple industry sectors, including healthcare, financial services, retail, tech, media, telecom, across North America, Asia, and Europe. He currently leads the solutions team at Skyflow, helping organizations understand how to protect their customers' sensitive data. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Harsh.
Thanks, Lucy. So as you mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you about when to reevaluate your privacy posture. And when I bring up this topic, one of the first questions I often get from large organizations is, wait, do I even have a privacy posture? Short answer to that is yes, every organization does, and I've got the full NIST definition here. But an easier way to think about it is it's essentially the status of all of the sensitive and private information you have in your organization in the context of the resources and capabilities that you have to govern and protect it. So this includes things like the policies, the processes, the security technology, as well as the people who can see the private information and how they're trained and how they go about protecting that data. So on to the top 5 reasons. The first one is if you are currently reviewing or auditing your regulatory compliance and certifications. So this is a periodic process you have to go through to make sure you're complying with the local laws around privacy, or you're updating your certifications, and it can be really expensive. Constantly auditing processes, data use in your technology stack, as well as the proliferation of privacy data, can be really complicated and requires a deep understanding of everywhere that data is and every person who can touch it. So anytime you can rethink how you approach it to reduce the surface area of exposed data, significantly reduces the scope of those audits and compliance verifications. And you can accomplish this as simply as just making that data less available throughout the organization and cataloging it well, but also changing your data access policies and adopting strong data governance practices. It's also about understanding every place you need to go in the enterprise, and as you've cataloged some of this, it's taking a step back and looking at how you can use technology to automate this as much as possible, while still ensuring that the people who need the data can gain access to it. So the number 4 reason is if you start embracing hybrid and remote work. So this one may not be as obvious because you think, well, the same people are accessing the same systems they used to. The biggest change is the workers are now accessing the sensitive information everywhere. So even if you have a VPN, there's a lot less oversight and a lot less protection from a bad actor or a simple mistake, like somebody running to the bathroom in a cafe while they leave their laptop plugged in. Those perimeter-based methods we're used to when you had everybody coming into an office or a single site just no longer cut it. So you've got a couple tasks here as you're looking at your privacy posture. The first is, how do you create policies and tech to ensure that the sensitive data is only available when it needs to be in the context of the work the employee is doing at that moment, versus previous approaches, which used to be, once a user is logged into an app, they can see everything. You can remove the risk of data misuse by employees engaged in their normal business activities by thinking about location flexible policies that offer that access without compromising security and governance. This can be things like putting an additional layer between that back-end system that's contextual, like for customer service reps who are now at home versus a call center, or just looking at your policies and procedures and deciding, does HR Analyst 4 actually ever really need to see an SSN? The number 3 reason, if you're entering or expanding into new markets. Now this one is a pretty obvious one. New markets means new regulations. So you have to look at, are there data locality requirements? Do I need to replicate all of my data infrastructure in a new region? And how am I looking at the evolving constraints as new policy regulations come forward, right? Now, duplicating your entire data and partitioning your data infrastructure can be very complicated. But there's a lot of value to looking at how you just segregate the sensitive data versus replicating your entire data estate and landscape. Also, thinking about how privacy regulations are evolving in some of those jurisdictions can be really helpful, as well as having a clear understanding of how you as an organization view the data jurisdictions, right? For instance, how do you think about a US customer who is a US citizen who is temporarily relocated to the EU or the Caribbean, given that we can now work from everywhere? There are a lot of things to think through here, but as you're entering into new markets, it's really worth taking a step back and saying not just what are the current regulations I have to comply with, but also looking forward to what's coming down the pike and how I can take a privacy by design approach that is thinking about my entire technology landscape and building privacy in as a first-class citizen. And now, the number 2 reason. This one's a little bit obvious and pretty clear. Anytime you're building or launching a new offering that uses customer data, you're getting closer to the customer and you're going to have exposure to new privacy risks. We see this a lot, especially in fintechs that are now interacting with end users directly or capturing new sets of data. We see this quite a bit in the beauty and wellness market, where as they start offering more holistic services, organizations in this landscape are starting to dip their toes into HIPAA or medical data that has an entirely new set of privacy constraints. So as you're launching something that uses customer data, you now have a larger surface area of privacy data that you have to protect and think about differently. There's also a lot more work you have to do around ensuring that your data is secure, because when you launch something brand new, a single privacy misstep can eradicate what could be a fantastic offering or product. Again, this is really an area where a privacy by design approach can make the difference between success and failure. The other benefit of taking that privacy by design approach is you can use it to communicate to the customers of the new offering as a differentiator, right? It's an opportunity to build trust from the get-go by articulating how you look at privacy differently or more nuanced than some of your competitors, and how you can validate that with even the technical underpinnings of your product. This is a real area we're seeing spring up, especially in, as I mentioned, health and wellness, but also in retail, as a lot of brands that weren't previously interacting with customers directly are trying to build those longer lifestyle connections. And as you look at getting closer to a customer over their entire interaction with the brand, you have to be that much more of a steward of trust. All right, and the number 1 reason to reconsider your privacy posture is if you haven't really spent time thinking about it and you don't have a set of codified data privacy standards that drive your architecture. So this is a really important point. Your privacy standards have to influence your technical architecture, because as your organization grows, as different teams start using data for analytics, you start to see a proliferation of sensitive information throughout the organization. As organizations get more data driven, as you start focusing more on customer analytics, customer intent, if you're allowing that PII or sensitive information to propagate through the organization, you have a massive problem just cataloging it, just understanding where it is and who has access and what they're going to be using it for. So the first step is understanding where all that data is, and then creating a set of standards and guidelines to simplify how you handle that sensitive data. And then using those standards and guidelines to ensure that your architecture makes it easy for your customers to trust you with their data. Privacy really can't be an afterthought, and transitioning to privacy by design doesn't happen overnight. So we usually see organizations start with compliance. You know, I'm in healthcare, I have to make sure I'm HIPAA compliant. I'm handling credit card data, I have to be PCI compliant. In the EU, I need to be compliant with GDPR. In the US, I might be subject to CCPA. That's often the first anchor. and where we see organizations start, but it's really a bare minimum. You can really differentiate in the marketplace with trust by having a more sophisticated, more robust privacy posture and the architecture to support it. Now that means not just creating the base protections of the data and ensuring it's locked down, but also ensuring you have an understanding of whom in your organization needs to use the data when and how they're going to access it, and that the right amount of data is seen at the right time. And that ends up being a little bit more nuanced than what we think of as traditional security. So up front, I actually lied. It looks like we've got 6 more reasons that are worth considering if you're going to be rethinking your privacy posture, or 6 more reasons to rethink your privacy posture, I should say. The first is rebuilding trust after an incident. Personally, I think this one's a no-brainer. If you've had an issue, you need to come out with a strong statement and some sort of proof for why customers and employees should be able to trust you again. The second is strengthening trust with your employees and talent. Employees are now more aware that their employers have a lot of sensitive data about them. And in one of the tightest labor and hiring markets I've ever seen, and the US has seen in its history, it's a real opportunity to show your employees that you care about them as people and not just resources, and use trust as an anchor for some of those interactions. Another is as brands are starting to embrace not just celebrity spokespeople, but individual influencers, or starting to work with gig economy and contingent staff, you're going to have a lot of very sensitive privacy information that people are going to want to compromise. And it's really valuable to make statements and differentiate with those groups for how you can protect their data. Another time to take a look at it is just if you're in the process of refactoring your data architecture and reducing your tech debt. There's a great opportunity to take a step back and say, what's going to clear my existing tech debt, but also reduce my security and data burden going forward. Then revamping your marketing and customer engagement. Customer engagement, the support interactions, again, how you interact with the marketplace, you can make some really strong statements. And of course, competing on trust and customer experience. This one really ties with the previous one. It's just an opportunity to come out and clearly differentiate in a crowded set of marketplaces and services on why your offering is more secure and more safe than competitors. And we've really seen Apple and Google try and come out strongly here, and it's made a big difference over some of the other missteps we've seen with some large tech companies. So as we look at revamping our privacy posture, working with Skyflow customers, we've noticed a number of common privacy challenges, or really opportunity areas that are worth explicitly addressing, right? Obviously, the first is compliance. Everyone tends to start here. Once you're compliant with local laws, you then tend to progress to data security. It may not be required for the compliance laws, but that doesn't mean you want to end up on the front page with a breach. Once you are sure that you're locking down data and the only people who need to see it are the ones who can see it, is getting to data governance. Now there's a little more subtlety around here because it's not just locking down the data and being able to say it's locked down, but it's observing how that data is being used, where it's spreading throughout the organization. Of course, data residency is a common one as organizations transition to global. But now with the rise of the API economy and very complex ecosystems, we're seeing a lot more interest in how we can securely share data with the partners and ensure that the right people at those partners are seeing the right data, that deletion requests are propagating through the ecosystem. And then, since organizations are getting more data-driven, once you lock this data down, you may still need to use it for analytics. So there's a notion of how do I create a privacy infrastructure that allows me to perform analytics securely and not allow some of that PII to leak, but still enable the right people to make the right decisions based on it. And finally, there's a lot of interest right now around encryption, and the old approach was I'm going to encrypt everything and lock it down. This prevents a lot of use of the data. So we're seeing a lot more of a shift to tokenization. Tokenization is a great start where you can start to replace sensitive data in other systems with tokens that may share some characteristics with the original data. Things like if I have a phone number, I may want to encrypt or suppress everything except for the area code so I can get some understanding of geographies or where people were when they first signed up for their phone. It really allows you to take a more interesting look at that data while still protecting it. But related to all of these, I'm going to go back to something I've been talking about a lot, which is trust. As we look at how companies are handling sensitive data, the most important thing that we're seeing, especially in the customer eyes, the end customer eyes, is that it's not just about compliance, it's about trust. As I'm engaging with your organization, do I feel that you are acting as a trustworthy steward of my personal information? And the misuse potential is becoming extremely more rampant, and things are becoming extremely more sensitive. So this is really why we at Skyflow created the company. Here at Skyflow, our mission is simple. We want to build the data privacy vault that every company needs and deliver it with a simple but powerful API that makes it as easy to use as a Stripe, Twilio, or Okta. So we've got three core products. There's a PII data privacy vault, a payments privacy vault, and a healthcare vault. But fundamentally, the whole reason for the company to exist is to give you the ability to isolate the sensitive data, protect it to ensure it can't be compromised, and harness it so that you can start to use it to make those analytical, data-driven decisions without compromising on the security and ensuring that you have the right governance that satisfies the compliance requirements of today as well as going forward. So I went through a lot of information here and kind of jetted through it a little bit faster than I think I intended, but I'd love to open up for some Q&A. Lucy, were there any questions related to the material that we've presented?
Yeah, we have some questions here for you. So the first one is, why is data privacy suddenly so important?
You know, it's kind of a funny question because I don't think it's more important than it used to be. I think it's always been very important, but I think the risks of compromise are higher. So, you know, things like the API economy, where there are now many loosely coupled services that are supporting every interaction, from, you know, an Alexa speaker allowing us to call a Lyft or Uber car that suddenly show up at our house. There are a lot of different steps and a lot of different transitions that the location of our home and audio recording that may include background noise, as well as account and credit information could potentially pass through. A lot of retail organizations are getting much closer to their customers. And this means that they are now getting end user data. And with contingent workforces, you may not be the employee of a single company. You may be doing gig economy work around 7 or 8 companies that now all have things like your social security number. You know, we're also seeing the evolution of the healthcare marketplace where it's no longer, you know, I have the same doctor I've had for 20 years, I go to the same location, it's with the same insurer. More frequent changes in jobs, you know, multi-provider ecosystems, and the wellness market dipping into medical also means that that sensitive data is going out. So it's not that it's more important to secure the data, it's just that there's more risk and more opportunity for that data to spread and be misused that I think is heightening the importance. And it's a real opportunity to get ahead of the problem now. And I mean, just even in the last couple months with issues we've been seeing around, you know, increase in phishing and cyber attacks coming out of Russia, I think there's a lot of urgency, but a lot of opportunity to get ahead of some of the risks. Next
All right,
question.
our next question is, what's the risk of not revisiting your privacy posture?
I think the biggest obvious risk is showing up on the front page of the paper for having a breach and compromising your customer trust. Trust is one of these things where it takes a long time to earn and, you know, milliseconds to lose just with a compromising issue. It's there's a lot of issues with lost business, potential fines, but also just your ongoing security and privacy efforts can be very costly and take away from running your core business, right? If you're spending 20% of your time ensuring that you're compliant versus having automated systems and policies and the ability to validate that you're meeting them, you're just incurring a massive opportunity cost that could be used to better connect with your customers, release new offerings, and get your organization to that next level.
All right, the next question is, what's the difference between a privacy posture and a security posture?
Ooh, this is one I get asked a lot, and it basically comes down to the distinction between security and privacy. While really closely related, they're definitely not the same thing. So security is all about protecting and ensuring that things can't be accessed. We refer to things as being secure when we know that they can't be consumed or used. And security very often takes a little bit more of a binary look at the world. Something is secure or it's not. It's locked or it's unlocked. Once someone logs in, you may have some fine-grained access control, but privacy has a lot more nuance. Privacy, first off, is very much centered around this notion that as an individual, I should be able to control who can do what and see what with my data. And I'm going to rely on an organization to make sure only the people that absolutely need to access the data for relevant purposes can use it for those purposes. So there's a lot more subtlety because you want privacy data accessible. You don't want it completely locked down, but you want it accessible only for the right uses. And so it's about what use of that data is appropriate, and as a human being, do I trust that that data is being used correctly? Next question.
Yeah, so someone is asking if they're not sure who owns data privacy at their company, where should they start?
So yeah, this is another question that we get asked a lot. In my experience, data privacy really has a few key responsible parties, and it depends on which facet you're talking about. The first owner of data privacy we usually see in an organization is the legal department, right? So they're often required to set up compliance, ensure that the terms and conditions are correct, employees are undergoing the right training, et cetera, and they usually take a little bit more of a checkbox view to privacy. Did we comply with this? The next is InfoSec. So your security team is going to be involved in actually putting together the infrastructure that ensures that the data is locked down. But what we're seeing more and more in organizations is a third group cropping up that is a privacy team that is a mix of understanding of the legal ramifications, some of the ongoing operational policies, but also ensuring that they understand how the technology is being used. So it's one of these things, you hear a lot of organizations say, everyone's responsible for security and everyone's responsible for privacy. When that's the statement, if everyone's responsible, no one is. So it's good to look for the individual owners in those teams. But I think as organizations mature, you're going to see a chief privacy officer associated with the chief customer officer. It's not just a one-off, it's not just a checkbox. It has to be thought about as part of the ongoing core operations and embedded into those products and embedded in every team, from product management, engineering to customer support, but really with an organization that's responsible for having a forward-looking view of what privacy means today and tomorrow and how that ripple should flow through the organization.
All right, we have another question here. If someone is compliant with all current regulations, isn't that enough?
I think that gets back to the trust statement. Compliance is a checkbox and it's a great place to start, but it doesn't eliminate the risk. Laws are always backwards looking. We try to, when you look at just legislative processes and you look at governing bodies, it takes a long time to draft a law, and the types of attacks we see, the types of risks we see are always a little bit lagging. So I think compliance is a great first step, but a mature privacy policy should be looking at what does it mean to take a stewardship approach, and what does it mean to say we have sensitive information that we need to use. We need to protect it against the current risks, but also give ourselves the ability to identify coming risks and protect it against those as well. Next question.
Yeah, so what are some of the new technologies we should consider for privacy?
So a little bit of a commercial here. Obviously, at Skyflow, we think that a data privacy vault is really important. You're seeing a lot of interest in the marketplace around technologies like tokenization, and tokenization is great. It's a really good place to start protecting data and extracting sensitive data from systems that have those fields but don't really need that data. But tokenization only gives you the protection or de-identification of that data. If you don't have a vault to securely store and govern the data, you don't know how the data is being used once it's de-tokenized, right? You need to understand how frequently it's being accessed, who's being accessed, have some detail auditing around it, as well as human readable policies, because just replacing data with one type of token, there's no one size fits all. Customer support may need to know the last 4 digits of the social security number to verify a customer calling in is the right customer. Someone doing some upsell and cross-sell doesn't need to see the social security number at all. But if they're using the same applications, if they're using the same web endpoints, all that data may be surfaced. So having the ability to isolate, protect, and then harness that data makes a huge impact. I think also data cataloging is going to be very important. You've got massive data proliferation. So things like the ability to scan your inbound and outbound API traffic and assess if there's PII data going through misconfigured endpoints is going to be huge. The ability to see how data is proliferating around the organization, catalog where you're seeing that PII is really important. And then just focusing on how you think about the audits and communicating those through the organization and how you apply policy and ensure that that's being followed. So things like policy agents are also going to be really important for a mature privacy posture. Next question.
Looks like we have one last question here for you. What are the privacy missteps that you see the most often across industries?
Well, I think the biggest one is focusing on just compliance. Right? A lot of people think, okay, we did that, we got the checkbox, we're PCI, we're SOC 2. That's the first one, right? Because as we discussed, it's a good first step, but it doesn't ensure broader protection, and it doesn't necessarily give you flexibility as those rules start to change. The second is thinking that privacy is just a security problem. Locking something down and then completely unlocking it and making it available doesn't give you the fine-grained understanding and the nuance that people expect from privacy. The other is treating privacy as a bolt-on experience, right? Privacy isn't something you should think about the week or two before you launch. Privacy by design is really this approach where you say, anytime I'm going to interact with customer or potentially sensitive data, I need to build my infrastructure in a way that ensures I can understand where the data is being used, who's using it, give fine-grained control over how and when that data is being used, be able to lock it down, be able to delete it, and then backwards looking, be able to see every place it's gone, who's been using it, and how it was being used, so I can understand the impact and scope if there is a breach or event. All right, so I think that was all the questions, right?
Yeah, that was all the questions.
Great, so I'd like to thank you all for your time here, and just kidding with this slide. It's been a pleasure talking to you about data privacy and a privacy posture. If you'd like to discuss your company's privacy posture, feel free to reach out to me directly. My contact information is here in this slide, and I look forward to hearing from some of you. Thanks again for your time, and Lucy, back to you.
All right, well, with that, DZone would like to thank Harsh for a fantastic presentation. And DZone would also like to thank Skyflow for providing the audience with a great webinar. And lastly, thank you to everyone who tuned in. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career.